Okay, what I want you to do is either in pairs, if you don't like the person next to you, on your own, in threes, whatever, doesn't matter, whatever you like, is to look at dialogue 1, and I want you to do two things really. First of all, look at it as a piece of English. You're all highly expert English speakers. And what meat could you get out of this dialogue? Imagine you think, oh, this is a nice dialogue, I'd like to use this in class. How could you exploit it to do some of the things we were talking about this morning? What would you exploit from this particular dialogue? Now, I will explain, this dialogue is taken from a corpus, but it has been edited, it has been cleaned up. Punctuation has been put in. All sorts of things have been taken out. In the raw, it would have looked something like that in English, where you've got various things that are going to just confuse your students, going to put them off. These are codes that tell the computer certain things that we want to be able to access. Okay, so laughs, for instance, is in square brackets because we don't want the computer to think that's an English word. Because otherwise, if we ask the computer to produce a vocabulary list, it'll say the third most common word in English is laughs. So it just means people actually laugh at that point and so on. So this is a cleaned up version from a textbook, from an English for Adults textbook. It is in American English, but don't let that put you off. Get together now, and I'll just give you a few minutes. We haven't got a huge amount of time, but just try and exchange a few ideas. Where's the meat in this? Where's the bang for the buck, as the Americans say, in this dialogue? Okay, this is like speed dating. We're going to do everything really fast. You've probably got at least one thing you can say about it in your pair or group or whatever. Let me have some offers. What gems have you found lurking in these? What pearls in these oysters?
Well, repetition is possible, isn't it? Repeating.
So there's some repetition here. Could you give us an example? So it doesn't matter if you repeat the same thing in the same sentence. That's a point, isn't it? You know, learners sometimes think, well, I've said remember, I can't say it again, you know, but of course you can, because we repeat ourselves all the time. The other points?
We thought we'd read out the main points and condense it to the main.
And what would those main points be?
Those points was basically, I missed my bus on the way home, and the driver set me home.
Okay, so you reduce the story to its core elements. That's a nice technique, isn't it? Because when someone's telling you a story in a foreign language, you can get swamped by the detail, can't you? And you miss the main events. There's a very famous piece of sociolinguistic research done in the States by William Labov on stories and what makes a story. And of course, stories basically only need really 2 or 3 things. They need something unusual to happen. So if I say, yesterday I went to work, did my work, went home, had my tea and watched television. It's not a story. You're going to say, so what? But if I say, yesterday I went to work, sat down at my desk and there was a crocodile under the desk, suddenly you're in the presence of the story. So you've got to have at least one what Labov called complicating event. And you've rightly focused in what complicates this, what makes a story is you miss the bus. And then, of course, you've got to have some resolution of that, otherwise it's not a story. You know, if I say, I went into work yesterday and there was a crocodile under my desk, I'll see you later. So there's got to be some sort of resolution. What happened? Did you call the fire brigade? Did they come from the zoo? You know, did it turn out to be not a crocodile but someone's handbag or what? You know, something like that. Okay. Any other points? And then I shall do the usual tyrannical teacher and tell you what the points are. But I didn't.
Well, you can leave out the way, the sentence will be there.
You can leave out.
Not really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? You don't have to say not really. You don't have to say well. You could say, do you remember much about kindergarten? I remember my first day at school. Suddenly, it doesn't sound like such a natural conversation. Now, why is that then? Go back to what we were saying this morning. What do the not really and well do? They link back, they acknowledge. They're saying, I'm taking into account what you've just asked me. So they're small words, but they are building the bridge between the speaking terms, and that is, 90% of this perception of fluency, this perception of flow. The word fluency and fluent in English comes from the Latin fluere, meaning to flow. And so when we talk about fluency, we're talking about things flowing. Now, I think I'm on dangerous territory here, but I'm going to stick my neck out. I've given lectures in 45 countries in this world, and every country I go to, I ask the people of that country, how do you say fluent in your language, in your first or national language? And in every case, it comes out as something that means flowing. But I've got an awful feeling. Something like further. Trickle. And it means. But it doesn't mean flowing like a river. And that's of course. My whole thing comes unstuck. So, well, there we are. But just take my word for it, in every other language in the world, it seems fundamentally human beings like the idea that language flows. Once we have a... Okay, we won't go any further on that topic. And could you use it about language? Would you comment that? Yeah. So that's great. That's makes my point that it's a fundamental human thing that we require flow in conversation. So without those words, as you pointed out, you could leave them out. It's perfectly well-formed, correct English without them, but it is not conversational English because it is not creating that flow, that linkage. Any other points?
So small words, they seem to hold the emotions out.
They rather than emotions, they hold your scale of involvement and engagement. Rather than emotion. They show the degree to which you are engaged in the conversation, that you're giving yourself into the conversation. It could be emotional, it could be intellectual, but you're absolutely right. The small words are not innocent. They do, and they're subliminal, they're not noticed. As I joked this morning, if you went for a job interview, the interview panel wouldn't say, well, I noticed you used 13 actuallys and 4 basically, so I think we'll give it a job. It's never done like that. Not even oral examiners know that. They don't, you don't go into, I've been an oral examiner for the Cambridge exams, and you don't go into the exams thinking, I'll get this, they don't use actually, they're going to fail. You don't do that, but it's very unconscious, subliminal, yeah. I forgot what you were saying. Emotional, yes. Okay, so engagement. There's a level of engagement. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I've done some studies, reading up on things like Asperger's, and there seems to be a lack of these small linkages in conversations involving people with Asperger's.
Yeah, absolutely
and that's what
right.
makes it sound disjointed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is why, of course, the definition of various places on the autistic spectrum is lack of socializing, lack of ability to socially engage. You can engage on content, and Asperger's, I have a friend who has a son with Asperger's, and in terms of knowledge and detail about things in the world, he is unsurpassed. He's a real little Stephen Hawking. But actually socializing with you about those things, you're absolutely right. Can I draw your attention to something? In this conversation towards the end, Thomas says, the bus driver had to call and find out my address and everything. Not terribly, he had to find out how much he had in his father's bank account, whether his sister was having an affair with the neighbour, what his inside leg trouser measurement was. No, and yet it says and everything. So what does and everything mean here? Just the address. No, he says the address and everything.
Phone number, how to get there.
Phone number, how to get there?
Yeah. It's your turn next. So I finish speaking.
That's, I will come back to that point. No, let me.
It's
The point is this.
talking like a phone call, isn't it? It's generalising like a child. It's going back to being a child soon.
Correct. Let me give you an example. Somebody else just said something. I'm going to take you to a different corpus, to our British English corpus, which we have at the University of Nottingham. And I was very struck by a little conversation in there. Two students discussing how they're going to entertain a visitor for the weekend. And one says to the other, well, she's coming on Friday night. We can take her to the Trip to Jerusalem, which is a pub in Nottingham that, amongst 500 others, claims to be the oldest pub in England. It says, we can take her to the Trip to Jerusalem. And the other student says, she doesn't drink alcohol. And the other one says, that's okay, she can have a Coke or something. That's okay, she can have a Coke or something. What does all something mean there?
Yeah, something similar.
Something similar. It doesn't mean a house brick or a yak's milk cocktail, does it? No. It doesn't mean a camel steak. It doesn't mean a camera. It doesn't mean a smartphone. These little expressions, such as or something, and everything, or whatever, things like that, encode cultural assumptions. We know exactly what they mean. Right? We are projecting and saying, you'll know exactly what I mean when I say he wanted my address and everything. And it would be most perverse to say, everything? Good Lord. You mean you told him about your credit card? You gave him your bank account details? You're a fool. You told him about your mother's affair with the neighbour? No, of course not. They project cultural assumptions that you know what lies within those limits. Now, let's consider some alternative scenarios for the Nottingham conversation. Let's take her to the pub. Right? She doesn't drink alcohol. That's okay, she can have a Coke. She can have a Diet Coke, she can have a Pepsi, she can have a Diet Pepsi, she can have an orange, she can have an apple, she can have a toffee, she can have a coffee, she can have a cafe latte, she can have a cappuccino, she can have tea, she can have iced tea, she can have lemon tea, she can have a Dunn's hot chocolate latte, she can have a Dunn's hot chocolate, she can have a skim milk latte. Obviously, this is absurd. And if you're going to say the whole list of what you can have, instead of an alcoholic drink, after about 3 or 4 seconds, your friends have lost the will to live. So clearly, that's not an option. That is not an option. Okay, let's go to the other end of the scale. Let's take her to the pub. She doesn't drink alcohol. That's okay. She can have a Coke. Like an Olympics, isn't it? So what we're saying is the only natural way to express this is by using a deliberately vague phrase like and everything and things like that and stuff and whatever. And you know what? If I was in a Welsh class and someone was presenting me with some conversational corpus, imagine this cleaned up. I want to know, what's this? Apethau. What's that, teacher? Tell me what that is. What is it? And things. What things? Similar things, exactly. So in Welsh as in English, you cannot express yourself naturally without the use of deliberate vagueness. It's called, linguists call it purposive vagueness. All languages have it, all languages use it, all languages have no alternative. So the notion that language is some precise object where you're always trying to find le mot juste, the perfect word to express yourself, in some ways it's not true. Vagueness is one of the most common activities that we engage in when speaking, not in writing. I mean, you wouldn't expect, if you wrote in a student essay in university, Shakespeare wrote tragedies and things. If you went to the Encyclopedia Britannica and wanted to learn about Brazil, and you read, Brazil exports rubber and stuff like that. So this is something that belongs especially to the spoken language. It is extremely common in English expressions like and things like that, that sort of thing, and everything, or whatever, and stuff. They're some of the most common pieces of vocabulary in the language. And I'm sure that apethau is just one type of the same phenomenon in Welsh. I'm sure of that, because we're all human beings. We all have to be vague. And when I did Welsh in school, I knew what the word peth meant. Nobody ever taught me this. You won't find it in a dictionary, because dictionaries are mostly based on the written language. But if you want me to speak Welsh naturally, I want to hear this in my class. I want you to get me to practice it. I want you to get me into situations where I use it. If you meet a friend in the town centre and they're bulging with shopping bags, you say, oh yeah, what have you been buying? They say, well, I've just moved into a new flat and I've been buying plates and cups and things. You don't say, why are you being so vague? Why are you hiding? Why are you being so vague? I thought you were my friend. Devious and vague. Nor would you expect your friend to say, I bought 4 cups, 3 plates, 5 sauces, 6 fish knives that I'm never going to use, 4 egg cups, 5, you know. You've got to take that middle ground. You have to. You are obliged to use expressions like apethai, things like that sort of thing. If they're not in your teaching of speaking, then your students will end up sounding very unnatural. There's something else in this dialogue, though, that's perfectly natural in spoken language. And that is, we often say things that are wrong. I don't mean linguistically or grammatically wrong. I mean the information is wrong. We need to correct ourselves. This dialogue is rich in ways of correcting what you've just said. Self-correction. Sounds like some sort of Chinese communist, Maoist moral activity. But all I mean here is, you say something, you say, her name's Dorothy. Oh, sorry, Dorothy. Delia. That kind of thing. We do it all the time. And I'd like to know how to do that in Welsh. I'd like to know the equivalent in Welsh of, can you find them here? Can you find where he corrects himself? Yeah, I mean, not really, sort of well, and the actually, see, actually is quite useful. It can be used to correct something, you know. Well, she's a friend, but actually, she's not a friend, she's someone I work with. Yeah? So, we do this in our own language all the time. It's perfectly natural, but we need the language to be able to correct ourselves and to be able to give out this signal. I mean, you could say, I started school at the age of 6. No, that's not correct. The truth is I started school at the age of 5. This is terribly long-winded, what a terrible mouthful. Much more natural to say, I started school at the age of 6. No, sorry, 5. No, sorry, 5. No, I may be straightforward about to do that, maybe. Or there may be ways that I don't know. Can you just say, bladda? I mean, bladda? 27, I mean 26.
You meddwl,
Yes.
You put it at the end.
No, you say no.
See, it's interesting that here you are, a large group of experts teachers in Welsh, and you have to stop and think, and you have to think really hard, and you have to question yourself. So it's an unfair question of me to ask you what you say, because none of us knows what we say. That's why we need a focus. Because the computer knows what we say. The computer has no prejudices about expressions like and stuff and whatever. The computer simply says, that's what you say, apethai, and you say it 500 times in every million words. That's what the computer can do. That's what a corpus can do. It brings to light those little things that you just don't notice when you're looking at dialogues. But they are the meat and drink of these dialogues. They are what makes them fluent. They are what makes them interactive. They are what makes them human. They are what makes them conversation instead of an interrogation. Sorry, I'm sort of browbeating you now. I don't really want to do that. But I feel very passionate about these things, partly because of my experience of learning about this. A beautiful language. I fell in love with the language. Loved it all the time I was studying it. But at the end of the period of studying it, all I knew was how to recite the table of mutations.
Do you think that in all the courses I've come across as a tutor, I only teach for one of those courses, but I have knowledge of others. I think all of them try to do this, put in there's definitely we're part of the way there. But do you think it's wrong to second guess what we actually do? You know, second guessing these small words that we need in conversation without the corpus. Do you think that's dodgy ground?
I think some people have trained themselves to be really first-class observers of the language. And I showed you one or two examples of dialogues from Welsh adult courses this morning that obviously come from people who are highly accomplished observers of the language. But to observe the language, you've got to know the sorts of things you're looking for. And the problem is, I think I mentioned this morning, research shows that native users of languages native users of languages actually are not very good at knowing what they say. That's why the corpus makes life easier. But once you've switched on to what the corpus shows you, it's easy enough then to hear it in real life. You know, I mean, I think I've developed two independent ears. One is listening to what you're saying to me, the other is listening to how you say it. You know. A corpus isn't everything. You know, don't get the impression I'm saying that we are all stupid and we need technology. I mean, all a corpus does is it can tell you how often apethai is used. You then have to ask yourself, well, why do people say apethai? Does it matter if they don't say it? And the answer is yes, it does matter if they don't say it, because they end up speaking either like total fools or like robots.
But some people are very annoying, aren't they? They keep repeating the same thing over and over. It's really irritating.
Yeah. Now this is another question, interesting question you're raising here, and that is, what is the difference between adequate communicators and good communicators? And certainly in a native speaker corpus, you get everything from almost total incoherence up to incredibly eloquent and fluent and entertaining storytelling and joke telling and all that kind of thing. Not that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, the corpus, unless you were very, very Stalinist and wouldn't let anybody speak on your corpus apart from highly educated middle-class professionals or something, you're going to get a very wide range of usage. What you try to do is to iron out the rogue elements, as it were. So the more data you've got, the more you get a profile of the typical user. You'll always have outliers. You'll always have some people who, you know, sound like books, and you will always have some people who just can hardly string a sentence together. But by having a lot of data, you get reliable statistics from the middle ground, as it were. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a profile of modern day Welsh usage. You're not trying to say how every single user, every single speaker of Welsh uses Welsh. You're saying, what is the current state of play, if you like, in Welsh? How often do ordinary people say Ystafell Morphy Apethai? Is this a rarity? Is this a rogue item? You know? I would bet my bottom dollar that it's not a rogue item, because what I know about English is that these things are incredibly common. There's something else in here that strikes me. If you don't mind me saying, do you mind me just giving out a bit about this? And then I'll get you working again. The point about apethai is it's a chunk. Right? It doesn't matter that it consists of and a plural morpheme I, pethai, plural. Anyway, that doesn't matter. One of the great secrets of being fluent is the ability to use fossilized, ready-made, off-the-peg chunks of language. It's the same for any language in the world. Little children, the evidence is that little children learn their first language partly firstly through chunks. Every English-speaking child at a very early age learns all gone. Right? The plate is empty, they say all gone. Someone walks out of the room, they say, Daddy, all gone. Right? No, there's no evidence that the child is sitting there thinking, oh, here's another adverb plus construction. Oh, well, these must be more adverb plus participle. I'll keep getting them all the time. No, the grammar comes later. The analysis comes much, much later, usually by the time they get to school. So that's the first thing. That the evidence is that language acquisition is greatly influenced by ready-made fossilized chunks. 2 words long. The most common 2-word chunk in English, spoken English, is you know. Some are 4 or 5 words, you know what I mean? What were you talking about? Oh, this, that, and the other. This, that, and the other. This, that, and the other. 5 words. 6 words? 7 words? 8, 9, 10, 14, 15? No. The fascinating thing is that no language, as far as we know, has chunks that are longer than about 5, 6, maximum 7 words. And this is to do with the architecture of the human brain. Back in 1956, an American psychologist called Miller published a very famous article called The Magic Rule of 7, give or take 1 or And what he did was he found that human beings have a natural capacity to memorize series of digits, series of numbers, up to more or less 7, after which they can't memorize them and they start subdividing. Now, if you'd like to all get out your credit cards and give them to me, I would. No. What I was going to say was, on your credit card, it has quite a long number. Now, the banks may be evil, but they're not stupid. And on your credit card, it's normal to divide the numbers up into 4s and 3s. Because if they put all 15 digits in one go, it's almost impossible to read it, it's certainly impossible to remember it. I can remember my home phone number, but I have trouble with my mobile number. And it's because these numbers are getting longer and longer. The human brain naturally focuses on a maximum of 7 bits of information before it subdivides again. Just as an aside, if you've got time, one of the outcomes of this is that schools and universities are now able to use plagiarism software. And how plagiarism software works is, it compares all the student essays in the exam or in the class, and it looks for any case where 2 students have used more than about 7 or 8 words in exactly the same sequence. Because the chances of that happening, believe it or not, are billions to 1. Okay? If you get 2 students who have 12 words that are exactly the same in the same word order, it can only mean one of 2 things. They are both legitimately quoting from some source. So I can say, oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. 14 words, not mine, Shakespeare's. So quotes are okay. But if 2 students have 12 words that are exactly the same, you can be absolutely certain one of them has copied the other. Once it's done that, the computer then crawls the web and looks for that same sequence of 12 words in Wikipedia and other places like that. So it's very powerful software, very scary. But let's get back to business. Chunks. We've got one there, a pethau. We've got another one up there, Ieithyddiaeth. Now I find that quite difficult to say. We stumble over, there are far too many W's and R's and Y's in there to the average English speaker, even though I did watch at school. Ieithyddiaeth. How many out of 10 I got for that? Is that okay? Is that all right? That's not my point, But I'll tell you what my point is now. Chunks play a very large part in fluency. You cannot be fluent if you can't use chunks. If you have to grab each word afresh each time you need it, you will end up sounding like a robot. Okay? So one of the reasons why we can sound fluent is because we're constantly using ready-made chunks. That's the bad news. The good news is it's fun to learn them in class. I've had lots of fun getting people to see how fast they can say chunks like, you know what I mean. I say to them, after 3 seconds, they say, you know what I mean. I say, no, faster. And after a while, they can actually say, you know what I mean. 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 But why is it important to say these fast? Well, this brings us on to the next wonderful, this is the news now, sounding a bit evangelical, but here we go, here's the good news. The good news is that as long as your chunks are fast, you will be heard as fluent. All the other bits, you take your time. Let me give you an example. Are you going out tonight? Well, not really, I'm tired, you know what I mean. Good, fine. Going out tonight? Well, not really, I'm tired, you know what I mean. Good. The message, the little main message, if you like, the core message, can be quite slow. But as long as your chunks are fast, you will be perceived as fluent. Now let's try the other way. You're going out tonight? Well, not really. I'm tired. You know what I Sounds like an offer you can't refuse. You're vesting the chunk with a meaning that it doesn't have, and the listeners start to think, oh, what's weird. I'm not going out tonight, I'm tired. You it's very a gig in wythnos. Unwaith. Wythnos. Talk to the sun. Stafell mochi. Ah. What goes on in the back? So, in training fluency, it's quite a nice technique to get people to practice saying the chunky bits fast. So in this conversation here, if I was learning Welsh, I said I stumble over unwaith ar wythnos. It's quite difficult. Now I suspect, I may be wrong, but I suspect that ordinary, normal, fluent Welsh speakers don't actually say unwaith ar wythnos. They probably say unwaith ar wythnos. Unwaith ar wythnos. Maybe it's just waith, but you still hear it as unwaith. Unwaith ar wythnos. Unwaith ar wythnos. Something like that? Something like that? Something like that. You get my point here, that practicing these chunks and getting them fast and so on contributes massively to the perception of fluency. But you can take your time on the other bits if there's some complicated grammar that needs to be constructed. You can take it a bit slower. And the nice thing is, you gave that example earlier about, say, the core utterance of the story. You could say that quite slowly, because that's the real meat of the story. And then put some chunks around it that can be fast. You know, guess what happened? I found a crocodile under my desk. You never guess what happened. You never guess what happened. But you never guess what happened. At that time, you see. How long have I got to listen to this story? So you make a good point. The core of a message can in fact be delivered quite quickly. You don't have to stumble and rush over the words. But the commonest phrases, so in English things like at the moment, once a week, at the moment, 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 moment. I'm working in a restaurant, moment. I'm working in a restaurant, moment, 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 moment. Not, I'm working in a restaurant at the moment. Okay, you all look a bit bamboozled, are you with me?
Yes, that's what they find difficult, isn't it, when they listen to people.
And listening then, of course, makes
When they tell me, well,
yeah.
they're saying these funny words and I don't understand what they're saying.
Exactly.
They're saying
Yeah.
it so quickly.
I lived in Sweden for about over a year, and I thought there was this word juste, like spelled Y-S-S-T. Y-O-O-S-T-A-Y, something like that. So only after about a year I realised it was two words, just dead. And when it's written, it's two words. But it's never said as just dead. In Swedish, it's always just dead. And I think the same applies, doesn't it, in Welsh with these complex negative replies and so on that we learners of Welsh find so torturous and tormenting. You know, my God, I've got to say yes. How on earth do I say yes in this language? How do I say no? You know, for you don't create that grammar every time. They come out this time. So whether it be a Welsh dialogue or an English dialogue, we see the same phenomena taking place. We see this continuity, this linking, yeah, and then ond, yeah, but, you know, there's the oh well, and there's the yeah, ond, again, down the bottom there, and these are ways of acknowledging something that's being said. But one of the problems in the classroom, you know, I said this morning that we're really concerned with teaching responsiveness, the ability to react and respond. And one of the problems in the traditional classroom is that it is very often teachers who respond rather than students. So we say to one another, you say, right, tell her what you did this weekend. And she says in very good English, well, this weekend I met some friends and we hung out in the park and we played soccer. When they finish, they look at me and I say, oh, well done, Diane. Very good, excellent. That's what happens in classes. Well, listen to this. Tell her what you did at the weekend. Well, at the weekend, I had a really bad accident. I fell off my bike and I broke my ankle. Good, excellent. Excellent, very good, Diane. It's absurd, because of course in the real world, if someone says I fell off my bike and had a terrible accident, then the model should be, oh, that's awful, or how terrible. The problem is in class we're trying to do two things. We're trying to evaluate the student's performance, and we're trying to ape or recreate real conversations, or get people into pairs. So that's something you've always got to try and get over. You've got to try and separate out the evaluation of the language from the evaluation of the actual reaction, to the content. And it is the reaction to the content that students miss out on in traditional classrooms where the teacher tends to be the one who gives that kind of feedback, that follow-up to what's being said. It's just a little thing that needs careful watching. I realise actually, to my horror, that we're almost out of time. And we've only done one of these wonderful dialogues here. The reason for bringing in the other two dialogues was to point out the presence of chunks like I bet. That I bet is different from I bet £100 on horse the other day and I lost every penny of it, okay? And they are said differently. I bet what? I bet £100 on that horse. This is not that, this is I bet. Bet you had a good time. I bet you didn't tell it. Right? So again, the presence of these little chunks that, as my friend there, I'm sorry, I don't know the name, was saying, they give an emotional engagement in it. You know, you're trying to imagine what it's really like to spill food on the floor, which is what this conversation is all about. It's basically a little story where someone says, I was cooking for friends in the kitchen and I spilled a whole lot on the floor. I was cooking Mexican food, and what I did was I popped out very quickly to the corner Mexican restaurant, bought some takeaways, brought it in and served it, and they didn't know the difference. And that's the conversation. So it's a funny little story, and we could reduce it to its bare elements. I cooked Mexican food, I spilt it on the floor, I bought some from the shop, and everything was okay. You know, you can bring it down to those elements, and that'd be really good. And then build it up again from there, you see. Once you've got those core elements, say, now let's elaborate, now let's build it up, and I think that's a golden opportunity. The other thing that you notice in this story, and we haven't had time to do it, Matt's big long turn at the top there. Anyway, everything was ready, and I picked up this big pot of rice, and I burnt myself. I picked up this big pot of rice. Is he holding a pot of rice at the moment when we say? Why does he say this big pot of rice? I thought this meant something that's in my hands. Yes, so it's creating immediacy, isn't it? This is part of taking the other person into account. I was talking about this morning. These are small words. They're so tiny you miss them. The use of this instead of what? A. So this can stand for the definite P, indefinite article. The use of this is regular in storytelling, and certainly in joke telling. Yeah? There's this man, and he goes to the doctors and he says, Doctor, my hands are shaking. The doctor said, ooh, do you drink much? He said, no, I spill most of it. So that kind of thing, yeah? Where you get, there was this man, and he had this dog, and he went into this pub. And those uses of this, they're so simple, but they transform your ability to tell a story. So going back to your good point about, we got the bare bones of the story, we know what happened. Now, how can we build it up, have some fun together, building it up so that it's actually something interesting, worth listening to, so that you're not going to bore your listener out of their tree. And I think that's a really nice way of approaching